myself, been at Birch for 4 years. For the last 3 years, we've got a board that looks after the organisation, and I'm CEO, but they've given me a bit of freedom of saying this digital agriculture is going to be super important for growers. And they've given me enough freedom to probably just cause trouble, but not really any cash. So they said, all right, you can show us, if you can show us some value for us as farmers and board members, why we want to put some of our money into it, we'll do that. But I kept on looking around trying to understand what the opportunity is for a grower group. And the only bit I could work out was the most boring bit at all. And it's about being super organised and getting everything curated. And if anyone's ever seen my desk, which most of you probably haven't, it's not necessarily a strong point for myself, but I think I reflect a lot of the farming community there. There's not too many people that I know, the farmers that are passionate about spending time in the office. Most of them actually prefer doing stuff. So the sort of thing is, I kept on coming back to this curation thing. How do we actually make that of value, that something's worthwhile? And sort of came to the conclusion that maybe an ag co-op could be the digital ag co-op could be the way forward. And what's a co-op? A very loose definition of people working together and putting their information together. That was sort of 2 to 3 years ago, and I've been on a journey ever since of trying to work out how to actually make it happen. So you're going to get a bit of old stuff, bit of new stuff, and we'll see how it goes in between. So as I say, the bit, and this is the hardest bit, is what is actually the value of digital agriculture? We had a chance from state government, some Victorian state government money to investigate this earlier this year, and we could come up with, from the literature, and there's very scant literature, which is always means you have to be fairly heroic, $120 a hectare. We've run that past a whole range of agricultural economists and people, and have said, look, here's the number we've got. Can you show us where we've got our assumptions wrong? And not saying it's not wrong or right, but no one's actually come back and said your assumptions are incorrect, the literature you're using isn't the building block, etc., etc. So we've got $120 a hectare. So when you've got $120 a hectare, and you can do it by farm or by region or whatever number you like, you get scarily big numbers that are available from digital agriculture, which basically almost the numbers become irrelevant because they become so big. So you sort of go with that, and you just run with that, and you sort of hope no one questions you too hard. And then we got, for the farmer, we reckon it's about $70 off the top. So the $120 for the value chain and $70 for the farmer. But when you start talking to the farmers about that $70, they sort of I just watched that film with my daughter the other day, and it still holds up. So it's a good film to watch. But the farmers are saying, "Show me the money," because really, they get these salesmen, they get these researchers, they get their advisors, and yeah, a lot of people out there have got solutions, but they just don't know what the problem is, and they're sort of saying, "Buy this solution, buy that solution," and the farmers aren't really convinced it's actually solving a problem for them. So we've got an issue. So we identified 3 issues in this first one. The first one's around connectivity, which Peter's mentioned. And once again, we've tried to use some economics, used an independent group to do the analysis. And these reports are available, happy to share them with you. But we try to work out what the value is not having poor connectivity is. And if you look at sort of for a farmer, if they spent 2 hours a week trying to do phone calls, where they have to spend time getting somewhere to make a phone call because they can't do it in the paddock. Their time's $50 an hour. That's $5,200 a year. Average farm size, 3,000 hectares. So you get $2 a hectare straight off the top. And you start doing these sort of fairly simple assumptions. They could easily be shot to shreds, I'm sure, but you've got to come up with something better, I suppose, is when I do these, when we do these. And you start getting where you can work out some of this profitability can come from, productivity. I know at BCG, if we have everyone in the office, we've got an NBN wireless connection, but our office basically grinds to a halt with everyone in the office. We don't have the bandwidth, and it's one of my real annoyances. And as I say, variable rate technology, $3 a hectare. If gross margin increase if it was applied across the farm using some fairly simple analysis. Capability is the second part of the challenge, and this is, I think, the biggest one, the one I think all of us here have got to take responsibility for, because at the moment, if any farmer came up to any of you in the room, and all of you obviously engaged in this digital agricultural space somehow, some way, who would you get them to go and talk to so that they could have an independent discussion about they want to invest $100,000 and they're not going to be sold a solution, they're just going to be able to sit down with someone and work through the various options of what's the best way to invest. I know in Victoria, basically I can't think of anyone. I'm not sure of the space in WA if there's anyone going along, but as far as I can work out, there's very few. And if this digital agriculture is such value to the industry, why is it that we haven't built the capability around this space, and that basically there isn't the ecosystem to support the farmer, the advisor, to work through these issues? As an industry, we've sort of probably said, oh, the farmer's got to wear all the risk here and we'll jump in afterwards if there's a business case. And then we're surprised the farmers aren't jumping in because the farmer's got no one to talk to. It's a virtuous circle. So what's the role of the grower groups in this? Have we been at the leading edge, sort of pushing the farmers and getting them through that, or have we been saying it's not really our space, we'll keep to our knitting, doing our trials, doing our extension, and being in a safe space? What risks have we been taking as the grower groups, or have you got difficult boards like me who don't really give you an opportunity to explore that space? Or if you're from the department, and it's how you take these risks to actually build this capability. And I think each of us have to think through that. Have we been pushing to take some of the risks to work out what the value proposition is to move the industry forward? And then the final one is the trust challenge. Trust is, I think, on the surface of it, the easiest one to put people off, but it's actually I think probably the easiest one they'll be the first one to overcome of the three challenges around connectivity and capability. The trust one will require people to spend time around looking at the ethical issues, the regulatory issues, what happens with autonomous processes, what happens with machine learning, how do we tackle this question of ownership? Leanne's talking later on, how we go through that space. All these things, they are real challenges, and we're trained to actually really not trust anything digital. Everything, if you read the paper regularly, cybersecurity is the biggest issue, etc., etc. There's a whole heap of reasons. So if you're a grower, it's a fairly big barrier at the moment to start thinking that this digital space is any good, because everyone's telling you digital's a scary space, you get done over, it's hard work. Just think of the census earlier last year. Government really tried to convince us there that this digital space is not something you want to enter. You don't want to put anything on a computer because it's dangerous. So we've got a real trust issue. Once again, we all have to think through that, think through what our role is in this space and how we actually can make promises that we can keep. And that's one of the issues with trust in this space, that do we actually want to store the data? If the farmer's already working with various people storing data and have an agreement with that place, do we actually also want to take on that risk of storing the data somewhere else? Do we have the ability to store it? Can we look the farmer in the eye that we can do it safely? Do we have the systems and processes to work through it? Is it actually our business, or trying to compete with something that John Deere's doing, or Case, or AgWorld, or ProductionWise, or startup internet business who's invested in that space? Is that our bit to compete against them, or are we trying to work off how we can leverage off their investment in the cybersecurity? And is our job to evaluate and provide some feedback on how secure that information is, and work out how the farmer can liberate that information to get the value from it? So when we started going through, we started trying to work out what the key barriers are. And we came up with 4 real key barriers. It's a sort of lack of standards, which Peter's referred to, and the WA department's working hard to tackle. Lack of leadership, I'll come back to that one. The technology, it's hard. and it doesn't always work. And if you're trying to make something business critical and it's in beta format or it fails, who's around there to make it work again within 20 minutes? We've got a visiting fellow coming out next year, Terry Griffin from Kansas State University. He's going to spend 12 weeks in Australia in 2 stints through some philanthropic funding through Vesky. And I've seen him present in the past, and he knows a yield monitor will be valued when the farmer doesn't start harvest till the yield monitor is working. And at the moment, I'm not too sure of any farmers that I know of that if they were told the yield monitor wasn't working, would that stop them harvesting? Most of them would keep going. Harvesting is more valuable than the data that could be coming in through the yield monitor. So at the moment, the yield monitor is a nice bit of fruit, but not much value in the farmer's eye. So there isn't a business case. We couldn't find a business case to going forward because no one's actually developed one. But I think the biggest thing, this is all pointing to this preliminary research, was around the leadership and just the void of leadership. And we've all got to take our hand up there. How we've been leading to work through this digital agricultural space. What's each of our roles in that space? Have we been taking a leadership role? We've seen it happen in lots of other industries where every time there has been a lack of leadership and every time the industry has gone through huge pain, huge disruption. Think of music, think of media, think of taxi driving. You name an industry that's, I suppose, gone through the digital disruption, and generally there's been no leadership and there's been pain all around. In agriculture, we're actually advantaged here. Agriculture is the least digitalised industry in Australia according to McKinsey, so that we should use that to our advantage. Let's see if we can get our leadership together and actually come up with a way forward that's going to make us work as an industry, rather than, I suppose, what I'd observe over my time in agriculture is take our default position and work out how we can be destructive and not provide much leadership, which is generally the way agricultural industries work, would be my observation, but that's just personal comment. So the technology is not being driven by the industry. It's generally by individuals, smaller companies, people with a passion, and guess what? Each person's coming up with their own solution. There's no alignment. Everyone's got a great idea. They're all passionate. They all actually know what they're talking about. But because there's not an agreement across the industry from all the people who go, oh, digital's too hard, just like the video recorder was too hard for my parents, and they're never utilised, no one's actually taking the bit because they're expecting everyone else to do it, because digital agriculture is outside of the domain area of knowledge. No one's stepping up, and we've got a real leadership problem. So from that sort of preliminary research, we got a grant from the Farming Together program to see if we can form a data co-op, and we're going through that process now. And I'll start off with saying that, as I say, we're keen to see if we can start a business. We've got till April to do it. We were just talking to the program leader yesterday about where we're up to and how it's not. We wrote a plan out and how nothing goes like a plan, and still know we have to have it all finished by April. But what we want to make sure is if we do something like this, we could probably have a business model established by April, but it would probably not be a viable one. We'd much rather actually try and work out something if it's going to have legacy or not. But how do we actually set up a business model? How do we actually make sure something's got some legacy and it's got a pitch? And we realise we've got a fairly small grant, and so how can we find some other investors to help us go forward? So we're working on 2 plans. One, we're so convincing that the farmer wants to invest in it and stump up some of the seed cash. Or 2, we're lucky enough we get to burn some of the state government money for a couple of years while we try and get the business established. We all much prefer the second model, but everyone knows unless you get some money in your hands, it doesn't exist. So you don't plan on it. But if you do get it, then it's up to yourselves to make sure you use it well and make sure that it actually use it for what you say you're going to use it for, which is obviously allowing the business to go through. So if you become dependent on that government money, then you're setting yourself up to fail. Also, we need to know what legal protections we work with growers, and we've got Leanne Wiseman helping us through that, and what are some of the technical challenges. And I might refer later on to the magic pipe, which is the way how we're going to solve that technical challenge going forward. We're going to have a magic pipe. So what do we have to do? We're trying to identify the best business structure. We're working with someone from the Business Council of Co-ops and Mutuals to help us with that, Rowan Clark. Very interesting background. He worked in the corporate finance sector, working with people like Lehman Brothers, Macquarie, and everything through the 90s and 2000s. And then about 2005 or 2006 decided he was more interested in social issues and became interested in social investing and social responsibility and got involved in the co-op movement. Obviously got out at the right time, but he also, the main thing why it's been great having someone like Rowan involved is he brings in a different skill set, he brings in the capability and the capacity that we need in agriculture, because with this digital space we need different people coming into the industry that we don't have. We're in a different area of domain knowledge and we need all these skills, and how do we bring them to the table? So what are we going to do? We've got to work out farmers to collectively manage how value is created. Unless we can show that value statement, we'll go nowhere. So that's the scariest bit, is how do we show that everyone else reckons there's value. Every other part of the industry goes, if farmers collectivise their information, there's value, but no one else none of the farmers seem to concede that value. So, so what are the key requirements? We've got the farmers' needs, service providers' needs, the market operators' needs, and the users' needs, and then there's everybody's needs. This slide here is from a CSIRO report, Paul Box. It's all available on the web. Once again, I can share that with you. Paul's come along with some meetings. We've had lots of farmer engagement in all this, to the point of too much, where the farmer's going, this governance stuff I'm sort of sick of talking about, really. I sort of tend to agree with them, except we need to get it right, because this is the hard bit, it's the boring bit. So that's the key requirements. So we ran a workshop with Rowan back in October, and we've got another one coming in January, February, but we're sort of slowing it down a bit because we want to make sure we get it right and have the right people in the room. And we possibly just had the group of farmers and a couple of people. We realised we probably need a few extra people in the room, and I'll come back to why that is so, but we want to get this financial model right and the legal model right. So it's basically, what is a co-op? It's a way farmers can exercise control over the data collected from them. It's got to be able to deliver value to the farmers while also retaining the value of data in aggregate for the farming community and the rest of the agricultural industry, and probably the wider world, actually, because there's a lot of the information has a lot of value to everyone, but the value is very hard to actually identify. So once again, from the CSIRO report, from the work we've been doing with them, how does it look under the hood? There's a fair bit of detail there. I've just put that up there because it looks like a nice infographic, but it's actually well worth reading. I encourage you each to read it because it sort of describes how it could work and the difference between individuals' data, the club data, and the public good data, and they all three are very important to think about when you go through this exercise. So when we start talking about the farmers, what could be delivered? The farmers always tend to focus on managing risk, and the challenge when we ask the farmers about how this data could add value, it's like asking people in the start of the 20th century how to get to point B, how to get to Mandurah faster from Perth, and everyone starts saying they want a faster horse. And the benchmarking thing is what farmers tend to talk about. It's something they know, something they can see, and they say they want a faster horse. What a data co-op's trying to engage the farmer into thinking about is actually we need a car is the way to get from A to B. It might not be faster to start with, but in the long run it will be. And this is the challenge. We've got to try and get people to think about something that doesn't exist, and then try and show that there's a value proposition in that. And that's what we're working through, and that comes back to this key, the financial model of how we get it working, how do we get the protections. But at the moment we're trying to get people to imagine something that doesn't exist, and the human condition in that space is we're generally useless at it. So we've got to start with, to go through the journey, we've got to actually basically build the faster horse while trying to build a car at the same time. Because to get people engaged, to get people wanting to be involved, we've got to give them something what they want. There's no point you being out the front saying, oh, don't worry what you want, we know best, because as an extension officer, having been down that pathway, it's not a very good way to get any uptake or anyone to listen to you. And nothing's changed in that space for a long time. So understanding how and where the data is collected, how what different forms it is, how could it add value, how do you aggregate it, who's aggregating it, and then once again, how do you actually get it to work to one another. Here's all the various people doing this various aggregation and saying that, yeah, how it's going to happen. It's more just there's lots of dots on the screen rather than the details. It's all over the shop. They're all providing different services, and they basically, none of them talk to each other, and it basically is such a disincentive to be involved in this space. It's unbelievable. So what are the key barriers? Obviously trying to provide some insight, get that privacy and security, but we've also got to make data sharing easy and providing some analysis from it. You've got to get reward for effort. Strategies is obviously providing these insights, addressing the security concerns, and tackling those sharing and analysis, which was what it's today. So the value proposition is farmers can share their data, and it actually leads them to making better decisions and getting some of that $120 a hectare into their pocket. The question is how much and what's going to be enough to get them involved, and everyone's going to be different there. And the other bit is just to think that the data market isn't a two-way transaction. It's multi-sided, and this adds to the complexity. So it's just something to think through there. So how are we going to build this data co-op? Obviously do the first bit simply, try and get the design right, get the right people partnering, and that's what we're working very hard on before our next meeting in February. Make sure we've got enough human and social capital in the room to actually tackle some of these challenges. If we went with our usual cohort, we'd be short and we wouldn't be getting anywhere. And then see if we can actually establish a data market in a pilot program, and then hopefully have something that a number of you in the room would be going, oh yeah, that's something we're interested in. We want to follow this and modify and improve on it. So we've got obviously got the risks that we're tackling. There's a bit of an evolution. We sort of got to get people into the marketplace, priming the pump. That's where some government funds are always handy. Then growing it, actually standing on your own 2 feet, and then obviously doing something that other people want to be involved in. They set up their own, and you actually all of a sudden you start getting a network happening. And there's a whole heap of Australia's covered with these various local-based cooperatives that are using similar methodologies and working together and actually going through it all. So you're going to have some principles at stake, which are very important. So, and we've got where we're going to, which is this next workshop, and that's basically where I end up. So the way I was doing a radio interview the other day and talking about where we're up to, and decided at BCG we're at the space where it's like, and my daughter's just about to turn 14, teenagers in the playground. They're all talking about something, but at BCG we've decided we want to go behind the shed.